Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first panel of the day, the impact of artificial intelligence on authorship, navigating copyright, ownership, and rights. And we have the most amazing panel for you today. This panel is going to focus on AI and text, literary works in particular. I'm going to introduce our panelists in no particular order. First, we've got Michelle Woods is somewhere here. There she is. Michelle is the director of the Copyright Law Division at WIPO. She leads the division's assistance to member states and serves as secretary to the SCCR. Before joining WIPO, Michelle was associate registrar for policy and international affairs in the U.S. Copyright Office, and she also worked in private practice before that at the law firm of Arnold and Porter in DC. Most importantly, for today's purposes, Michelle has been coordinating WIPO's copyright work on AI, and she is here to tell us about it. Welcome, Michelle. Next, we've got Alison Rodriguez, who is president of the Fédération Internationale des Traducteurs, or FIT. She is a linguist and translator in legal, human rights, and technical fields. She has diverse experience in strategy, policy, and promotion of the arts. She's known for her strong advocacy of multilingualism, multilateralism, and cultural and linguistic diversity, and has an interest in Indigenous language revitalization. She also has an interest in the ethics of AI and will be talking to us today about some of the translator issues with AI. Next to my left, we have Stephen Levy, who is an editor at large for Wired magazine, and he's responsible for many of the articles you've seen in the last couple of years on AI in Wired. He's been a contributor since its inception. He is also the author of 8 books on technology and its leaders. He is the expert in Silicon Valley here. Levy has chronicled the digital revolution, its impact on humanity, and the people behind it. He's written the foundational work on computer culture and hackers in 1984 and crypto 2001, the indispensable book on the story behind the groundbreaking technology years before people began gushing about Bitcoin and blockchain. He's also written the definitive books on Facebook, Google, Macintosh, and the iPod. And for my purposes, most importantly, he is a member of the Council of the Authors Guild. Andrew Foglia, to my right, is the Deputy Director of Policy and International Affairs for the U.S. Copyright Office. Foglia works on critical policy functions of the office, including domestic and international policy analysis, legislative support, and trade negotiations. Foglia joined the office in 2020 as Senior Counsel for Policy and International Affairs. His domestic and international portfolios cover artificial intelligence, which is why he's here today, South Asia, Canada, and Mexico. And before joining the Copyright Office, Foglia practiced law at Winston & Strawn's in their Copyright Media and Technology group. Last but certainly not least, we have the Authors Guild own Umair Kazi. He is our Director of Policy and Advocacy, where his work encompasses copyright, AI, labor, antitrust, and free expression issues. Umair previously served as the Guild staff attorney, counseling members on professional legal matters. He holds a JD from the University of Iowa College of Law and an MFA in creative writing from Columbia University. He is a writer as well as a lawyer. So I want to welcome our panelists. What we're going to do today is each of our 5 panelists is going to talk for up to 10 minutes. And then we will do, I may have some questions or I may not, and I'll open it up for questions from everybody here. So the order we are going to go in is Umair is going to start giving us sort of some background on the technology and what's, how literary works are being used. Then we're going to turn to Stephen Levy. Then we will go to Andrew Foglia to talk about the Copyright Office's recent work and the study on AI. and then to Michelle Woods, who will talk to us about the work at WIPO, which we heard a little bit about earlier today. And then finally, oh no, I'm sorry, we're going to then go to Alison Rodriguez, and then we'll end with Michelle. Okay, so I will turn it over to Umair now.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to New York. I hope everyone had a nice trip here. My name is Umair Kazi. My talk today will focus on how large language models, the technology underlying text generating AI, work, how these models are created, including how books and other copyrighted works are used to build them, the impact on authors as a result, and the Authors Guild's policy responses to the urgent questions raised by generative AI. I'm sure everyone knows, but I'll quickly summarize. Generative artificial intelligence is a technology that allows computers to perform tasks that approximate or emulate some level of human cognition. Generative AI system is essentially made up of a model and a user interface. So for example, the chat part of ChatGPT is the user interface integrated into GPT. Otherwise, the full name of the model is Generative Pre-trained Transformer Model, which is a type of large language model. And large language model is, in essence, an extremely large set of probabilities extrapolated from quote unquote training data, which can include several hundred thousands of, or possibly more books and millions of other text-based copyrighted works. I'll go into that a little bit more. And through the application of training algorithms on the training data. When a user prompts a generative AI system, the model generates output that most likely corresponds to the user's instructions. So what sets today's text generating AI apart is a computational innovation that was introduced in 2017 called transformers, which is also the T in GPT. Unlike before, where machines needed to be given annotated data sets to train them on particular tasks, the transformer method allows training to be done on raw data points without any associated labels or additional information. It enables machines to parse out extremely large volumes of language and text data and build probabilistic models from them. This type of training is called self-supervised learning, in contrast to the earlier supervised learning training method, which required immense amounts of human guidance. And there's human guidance in the self-supervised learning method too, but to a lesser degree. I think we can go on to the next slide. So the process of training a large language model works as follows. In the first stage, developers collect vast amounts of training data. In the case of large language models, this can include text scraped from billions of websites, message boards, social media posts, news websites, and repositories of books. Most of the web data comes from a large repository of a website scrape called Common Crawl. And except for a recent LLM called CLEM, or Kelvin legally trained large language model, all of the LLMs were trained on data sets that included illegally obtained copyrighted works, such as books, articles, and other text data. In the second stage, the text data is tokenized or broken down to constituent parts, which can be words, subwords, or characters. So for instance, a 100,000 word novel might be broken down into 100,000 word tokens. And once the text has been tokenized, it can be fed into a language model for training. That's the third stage called pre-training, or for example, the P in GPT. This is the stage where a developer picks technical architecture and then runs a training algorithm to encode features of the training data into the model. This is a very time and cost intensive process requiring large amounts of computing power and human guidance at every stage to make sure that the encoding is done in according to the goals of the training. So essentially what the training algorithm does is it allows the machine to, I often don't like to use the word learn, but it's essentially encode attributes of the training data into the model. And then once the model is prompted, it can generate or generate new text based on that. The resulting model is called a base or pre-trained model. It is a general purpose model, which is then often fine-tuned to perform certain tasks more adeptly. During this process, the model encodes contextual relationships between words or tokens in the text data, which allow machines to generate or classify text by capturing general linguistic features such as syntax, semantics, and word knowledge. So from the outset, it might seem like the computer is understanding language or composing it, but what it's essentially doing is predicting the text that might come next in a sequence from the probabilities of relationships between words and other elements in the training data. This is the slide that you see is just an example of the breakdown of the GPT models, what was fed or ingested in those models. As you can see, huge amounts of web text, 40 gigabytes in the case of GPT-2. Importantly, we don't know the training data or the constituent parts of the GPT 3.5 and 4 models. I think we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the ingestion of books, which are quite an important part of training large language models. The very first GPT was trained on a corpus of 11,038 fiction books and stories scraped from the indie publishing site Smashwords. This data set was initially compiled in 2015 by researchers from the University of Toronto in a training exercise to teach machines to associate captions to movie stills. Since then, greater and greater number of books continue to be used in training advanced large language models. The pile, one of the training data subsets used to train Meta's Llama model and other language models, contains almost 200,000 books, in addition to other text content as well. This book subset in the pile is called Books3, and it was compiled from a pirate book torrent service called Bibliothèque. I think we can go on to the next slide because I think the next slide. Okay, so that slide just you can read it on your own. It's quotes from early AI developers talking about why books were important to building large language models. Yes. The book subset in the pile is called Books3, and it was compiled from a large majority of the books in the pile in the Books3 data set were published between 2009 and 2019. So these are very recent books. The pile itself was created by an open source AI researcher to approximate the training data for GPT-3, which at the time OpenAI did not make available publicly, but did disclose the constituent parts thereof in a paper accompanying the release of the model. And as I said, we don't know what training data went into 3.5 and 4 and above. I think we can go into the next slide. Yep, that slide just shows that, for instance, in the pile, in the Books3 data set, which is used by used in a few language models, the books are actually, a lot of them are recently published books. Books obtained from pirate sources have also been found in the training data sets of Google's models as well. For instance, a Washington Post investigative report revealed that Google's C4 data set, a version of Common Crawl used to train Google's models and Facebook's Llama, contained books downloaded from notorious pirate site book.cc, which is a domain of the Z Library Network, which is under indictment for criminal copyright violations. The two principals of the Z Library Network were arrested a couple of years ago, and the Guild actually assisted the Eastern District of New York and FBI in investigating and prosecuting the network. I'm sure everyone that works in books have heard of the Z Library, unfortunately. In the case of so-called black box models like GPT 3.5 and beyond and Anthropic's Claude, for which developers have not yet revealed training information, we don't know exactly how many books were used, but we can reasonably guess these numbers to be in the hundreds of thousands or more by approximating the size and sophistication of the models, and the fact that we know that books are indispensable for training effective high-performance models. Moreover, experiments by prompting the models to respond to specific and often arcane queries about books have shown a high degree of knowledge, and which is unlikely to have been gained from just scraped web content, and suggests that books were actually ingested. And we know that these companies did not reach out to authors or publishers for licenses, so any books used in training these models were almost certainly obtained from pirate sources or otherwise copied illegally. There's no doubt that generative AI poses profound existential risks to writers. Unless proper guardrails are in place, these technologies could eviscerate the markets for human authored works and destroy the profession. I think we can go on to the next slide. Yeah. AI like GPT is already rendering web content writing, copywriting, marketing, and other communications types writing jobs obsolete. For instance, an Authors Guild member who writes marketing and web content reported to us losing 75% of their work as a result of clients switching to AI. And a content writer featured in a piece in the Washington Post about ChatGPT's impact stated that he had lost half of his annual income. Entry-level journalism jobs also face a significant risk, which is an early career stepping stone for many writers. Translation work faces a profound risk, and these are all important sources of income for writers while they work on longer projects or develop their careers. The other serious risk is of market dilution from machine-generated books and other works that can be cheaply mass-produced that will that flood the marketplaces and inevitably lower the economic and artistic value of human-created works. We have seen large numbers of low-quality AI-generated books and AI-generated content impersonating authors on marketplaces like Amazon. We have learned of instances where AI-generated books on closely related or very similar topics pop up for sale almost immediately after an author puts a book up for pre-sale orders. There has been a growth in the number of unauthorized summaries of books. It's a huge problem. We've written about it too on our blogs if anyone's interested. One egregious and well-known example of bad actors using AI to impersonate a famous author is a case of Jane Friedman, who is an author and publishing expert, who found a cache of quote-unquote garbage books written under her name for sale on Amazon. We've seen generative AI being used to create unauthorized derivative works, such as a developer using ChatGPT to write concluding books in the Song of Ice and Fire, George R. R. Martin's Game of Thrones series, and chatbots that imitate authors' voices and allow users to enter the author's works, like the Dan Brown chatbot. And there's other examples now also that we found on the GPT store. These are just a few examples of the challenges many writers are experiencing right now. There's a widespread, real, and justifiable concern among writers that AI will decimate the profession. In a recent survey, 69% of authors said generative AI threatens their careers, and an overwhelming 90% said that authors should be compensated if their work is used to train generative AI technologies. And there are a few other statistics on the slide ahead from our survey. We're about to do another one. These concerns are born out of the experience of enduring long-term precarity. We also did a recent income survey that found that the total median writing related income for full-time authors in the US was just over $20,000, and that full-time traditional authors earn only half of that from their books. I think we can go to the next slide. So what are we doing? Well, we'll talk about it more throughout the day, but generally we are lobbying for laws, regulations, and policies that recognize the following and require consent, require a permission for the use of writers' works in training generative AI and outputs, compensate authors who wish to allow their works to be used in the training of generative AI, transparency, create transparency obligations for AI developers to disclose what works they use to train their AI, and require permissions and establish compensation for authors when their works are used in outputs, or when their names or identities or titles of their works are used in prompts, whether through adding a new economic right under copyright law or a sui generis right, and or through a broad, well-articulated federal right of publicity. We're also asking for regulations to label AI-generated content, which would require authors, publishers, platforms, and marketplaces to label AI-generated works and otherwise identify when a significant portion of the work has been AI-generated. So I'll stop there and pass it on to Steve. Try to be mindful of time.
Stephen, thank you.
Hi, thanks, Mary, and everyone else for being here. So I'm been kind of a unique position because, as Mary said in her generous introduction, I'm an author on the Authors Guild Council, but my day job has me going to Silicon Valley quite often and spending a lot of time with the people who we're kind of squared off against in this battle. And I've come to understand them really well. As Mary said, my first book was called Hackers, It's published 40 years ago this month. And I spent a lot of time with the people who make this technology. And I've kept up with that in the last couple of years, written a lot about AI. Umair, in his great introduction to the technology, mentioned this thing called transformers. My most recent article in Wired is about the people who made the transformers and how that thing came about. And even though it's had a tremendous and will have even a bigger impact on authors, that wasn't in any of their minds when they developed this technology. So let me give you a little window on how the people building this stuff actually see it. And a lot of what we talk about is, on the incredibly valid economic plane and talking about the impact it's going to have on us, and how much, God darn money they're all going to make from, creating this technology. And, you could see the valuations now, the money flowing into this thing is billions and billions and billions. And we're hearing the T word being tossed around too. But let me tell you that by and large, the people who are at the leading edge of building this thing are not primarily motivated by money. They're on a mission from God. And that mission is to build what they call AGI, Artificial General Intelligence, which means, well, different things. None two of them can pin them down to say the same thing. But by and large, the definition would be that when you get AI models that can do everything like a human could do really well, right? And it doesn't stop there, because there's a very thin line between what they call what a human can do and something what no human can do. Yes, and that's called super intelligence. And I think there's very little breathing space in what they think they want and what they're building between AGI and super intelligence. They think that they're sort of the handmaidens to this evolutionary development where there's something that's going to be like smarter and more powerful than us. And they're very excited about this. They think it's going to be a great benefit to humanity. They do generally concede that there's a risk that it might wipe out humanity, but they think, well, this is so worth doing that we're going to do it anyway. What percentage of risk it happens? We've decided, and no one's questioning on this, no one's stopping them, that they're going to go and do it anyway. And so in order to do that, right now, you've got, as Umair said, to scrape an incredible amount of data, because these models have to be able to understand the world. And this has been a long struggle for people working in artificial intelligence. There was one project that went on for like decades. The guy who developed it recently died, because at one point there was thought that to do artificial intelligence, you'd have to basically, kind of figure out reasoning the way humans think, and then build that and program on it, and kind of allow for every instance. There was this one program that had people working for decades, like they're sitting in a room saying, gee, what happens with this problem? And, when you, kind of, go into a room and, and there's a stack of things, when you remove one, what happens to them? So they were writing instances one by one. That's not the way that people figured out artificial intelligence works right now. Is they do this massive training, and they have these neural nets that work on the same philosophy as our brains work, and just feed them in, and the thing will kind of figure out for itself how the world works. So you need a lot of data for that. You have a lot of instances. And it turns out that one of the most valuable pieces of human knowledge that have been created is books. Books are complex. They assume an understanding of the world. And, there's lots and lots of words and lots of instances to do. So a corpus of books is incredibly invaluable if you want to make your large language model, figure out how the world works. There was a couple of quotes I didn't get a chance to read in there, but I'm sure. Yeah. So I think it's a little ironic, because generally a lot of the people in the technology world don't think much of books. Samuel Bankman-Fried, the guy who got thrown into jail recently in crypto, he actually was quoted as saying, "I don't understand why anyone writes a book. Anything that can't be summarized in a couple paragraphs, like shouldn't be done at all. Why bother?" And when I wrote my book about Google, I had a long interview with Sergey Brin, one of the co-founders, and he started by saying, "I just don't understand why you're doing this. What's the point of putting all this stuff in a book? It's just not the best way to convey information." But now, like, they need us, and they're building these things. And their argument about why it's okay to do this is, they're saying, well, when a person learns, a person reads a lot of books, and you don't necessarily pay an author every time you read a book. It could be from a library, it could be in someone's house, you could buy it, and then it's imprinted on you, or you could hear about it secondhand. The wisdom of an author could be conveyed to you even though you might never have read the book, and you are educated for this. So they feel by denying their large language models the corpus of books is like saying a college can't teach people without licensing, paying money to the Authors Guild, right? Now, we don't agree with this, about why that works, but that's the way they talk. And what they're betting on, and I think we'll hear about this a little later from some of our panelists, is that they're going to get a court ruling, or there's a threat that they're going to get a court ruling, that scraping all these books, whether they're from pirated books or not, is going to be fair use. And they're going on the Google case because of that, because the Google case said that scraping books to put in a search engine was a transformative use. I'm not going to go into any of the legal stuff there. That's what they think. Now, long term, this all may be settled, because the other thing to realize is that the whole publishing industry is like a speck compared to the money that's being involved in here. I've talked to probably a dozen small AI companies that have started. They've got like 20 people, sometimes not even that many, and they're valued at like $2 billion. That's kind of a typical thing. This company called Cohere, one of the Transformer authors, $2 billion it's valued at from the funders. Now, Simon & Schuster got sold for $1.6 billion. And we just learned from the New York Times that Mark Zuckerberg, when he was learning about how his large language model at Meta, Facebook, was going to be used, he thought of the idea, well, maybe we should just buy Simon & Schuster. Why not? If Microsoft decided to buy the entire publishing industry, the big five, it could be like, what, $5 billion or something like that. They just spent $70 billion for a game company, right? So this money is like a speck to them. I'm thinking in the medium term, if we're stalwart about it, we're going to get some money out of these people, because their prize is much bigger. And the prize is to make money, and the second, the prize is to get to this AGI. I'm more concerned about what happens when we get there. What happens to us as creators, as writers? Now, and let me ask you a question. I first thought of this when Mary and I were in a panel in the Berkshires, last year, and I realized it's like a big question. Let's say someone gives you a novel to read, and you read it, and it's fantastic, and it inspires you. It changes the way you think, and you're recommending it to friends, and then someone tells you later on, you know what, that wasn't written by a human being. That was written by like a robot. We put it into a large language model, and a GPT-9 or something like that, and this is what it came out with. Let me ask you, raise your hand. Would you feel cheated? So that made me realize that really a big part of what's so important about what we do as authors, as writers, is that we connect with other human beings, right? And it makes a difference to us if a person is on the other end of what we're writing about. It makes a difference to us as an author, and it makes a difference certainly to readers. Now, this is something obviously that a robot could never do, but literally 2 weeks ago, I had an interview. I'm editing now with this guy, Ray Kurzweil, who's the person, an author, who, wrote a lot of books, and he's famous for, postulating this thing about the singularity, which is what happens when AGI comes around, and we're headed off the next stage of evolution or whatever. And I asked him directly about this question, and he said, it just doesn't matter to me whether a robot wrote it or whether a human wrote it. It's just the end of that. And I think that should make a difference. I think it's core to what we do as writers, and it should always make a difference. And I hope it always does. There we go.
I should add to that, that if AI produces a good novel, it's copied from existing novels. I mean, it doesn't get it out of thin air. So next, let's turn to Andrew, who's going to talk to us about what the Copyright Office is up to.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks for the invitation to be here. I'm going to talk about how the U.S. Copyright Office has experienced the authorship question involving generative AI outputs. I'll spend about 5 minutes on our registration guidance, and then about 5 minutes on our ongoing study of AI and copyright. So first, I'd like to explain how the Copyright Office is positioned in the U.S. government policymaking apparatus. We sit within the legislative branch within the Library of Congress. And importantly for AI, we are in charge of the copyright registration system. It's this responsibility that has put us at the forefront of the US government's response to artificial intelligence. So in 2018, an applicant named Stephen Fowler attempted to register this image you can see here, which he claimed was autonomously generated by an algorithm running on a computer program. Fowler's view is that the Copyright Act should allow AI authorship, and he offers roughly 3 arguments for this view. First, he says nothing in the Copyright Act explicitly prohibits it. Second, he says that the Copyright Act already allows non-human authorship via the works made for hire doctrine. And third, he says that as a policy matter, you should allow copyright over AI-generated works because this will encourage the generation of more and more works, and that's really the purpose of copyright. The office's internal review board rejected each of those arguments. First, it said there's a long tradition of courts interpreting the word authorship, both in the text of the Copyright Act and in the US Constitution, to mean human authorship. Second, it said that the works made for hire doctrine assumes there's an underlying human creator, and in any case, it relies on there being a binding contract, which you can't have with a machine. And third, as to the policy arguments, the office said it was simply misdirected. Those should really go to Congress or to potentially a constitutional convention, to the extent that the authorship requirement is a constitutional requirement. Fowler disagreed. He sued the Copyright Office in federal district court in the District of DC. The District of DC agreed with the Copyright Office that there is a human authorship requirement. That case is currently on appeal to the DC Circuit. So after Fowler, not long actually after the Copyright Office rejected his application, we received another application. Next slide, please. This one was for a comic book generated in part using the Midjourney AI system. The author wrote the words and used Midjourney to generate the images. The office determined ultimately that the images were not the product of human authorship. So we canceled the original application and issued a new application over those portions that did show human authorship. That is, the text that the author had written and the selection coordination of images and text. We said it was also demonstrated human authorship. So as a result of both these cases, in response to them, in around March of last year, we issued new registration guidance, or a policy statement. And that policy statement did 2 things. First, it reaffirmed the human authorship requirement in US copyright law and said that has roots in both the text of the Copyright Act and the US Constitution. And second, it instructed applicants that to the extent that their works contained AI-generated material, AI-generated material that was more than de minimis, they needed to disclose that fact and they needed to disclaim the AI-generated portions. So what do we mean by de minimis? The way we think of it is the question to ask is, would this portion of the work, standing on its own, if a human had created it, would it be copyrightable? If so, then you need to disclose and disclaim it. So for example, individual titles and individual words are not protectable under US copyright law. So if I wrote an individual title of a poem or a few words, I would not be able to copyright it. And if an AI had written it, I wouldn't have to disclose that or disclaim it. By contrast, a longer passage might be copyrightable, and therefore you would need to disclose and disclaim that. So what was the response to our registration guidance? Well, I would say mixed, mostly positive. People have been following it. Last year, we registered over 200 claims for works containing AI-generated material where the author had properly disclosed and disclaimed the AI-generated material. There are, however, a fair number of questions. Probably the most frequent and the most challenging involves the case of like serial prompting. What happens if somebody uses, for example, ChatGPT or Midjourney, and they enter an extremely detailed prompt and they develop it over and over and over again? Is there some point where that would give rise to a claim of authorship? And the short answer, based on the AI systems we've reviewed for which we've had claims to date, which we've reviewed, not the entire universe of AI technologies that exist in the world today, not the entire universe of all possible AI systems, but the ones we've reviewed today, is that it wouldn't matter. In our view, the expressive elements, the expressive decisions are still happening inside the black box of these models. And the way you would know that, or two examples of why we would know that would be one, cases where you enter the same prompt to get different outputs from the system. In other cases, the systems will subtly rewrite the user's prompts. And to us, it becomes very hard at that point to say that the user is the one who's really responsible for the expressive elements in the output. We got a case actually last year. Next slide, please. This is Teatro de Opera Special. And the author entered over 604, I believe not over, but actually 624 different prompts in Midjourney before arriving at the image on the left, the base image. He then touched up that image to make the final image on the right, which he submitted. So in our view, that image at the left, that is a more than de minimis contribution to the image on the right, to the final work. He refused to disclose it or disclaim it. And so we rejected the application. So the second question we got about our registration guidance is about de minimis. So let's say you have a movie and you're looking at one scene of the movie. In the background of this one scene of the movie, there is a painting. No question this painting on its own would be copyrightable. So in that sense, it would be, under our standard, be more than de minimis. Should the studio have to disclose and disclaim just that little painting in the background of a scene that most people won't even notice? And you can see that's kind of a hard question for works that are going to incorporate in a very minor way a lot of third-party content, like third-party copyrightable content. And so you might ask, maybe there needs to be some other kind of analysis here beyond simply whether the material will be copyrightable on its own. What you can think of as almost like a Feist screen in US copyright law. So we are listening to all these concerns. We're taking them seriously. Last August, we published a notice of inquiry that solicited public comment on a range of topics related to AI and copyright, authorship among them. We received over 10,000 comments, including from IAF and some of its members. We have now reviewed all of those comments. In fact, some of them we've read multiple times. We have teams reading them for different purposes. I can tell you that the topics that attracted the most attention on the comments were, unsurprisingly, the fair use question, or whether the ingestion of these works infringes copyright. And then second, the copyrightability question. About 50% of the commenters chose to address the question of whether these outputs should be copyrightable. Most of those comments were supportive of the office's guidance. We are still working on the report, so I can't really opine on some of the arguments that were raised on authorship, but if you don't mind, I'll describe a few of them we saw. So on the incentive question, we unsurprisingly saw a lot of people who said, listen, why does AI even need incentives to create? There's no sense in giving them copyright. We had other people say that, although AI systems themselves don't need incentives, humans need incentives to use the AI systems and to build more of the AI systems. And therefore, there should be copyrights so that we have like a glorious future of a bunch of AI systems churning out millions and millions of works per minute. Another argument we saw is that if AI outputs remain unprotected and free, so to speak, you're going to get a glut of them flooding the markets and outcompeting human works that you have to pay for. The analogy here was to something like the US situation in the 19th century before the US started recognizing foreign copyrights. Initially, I think probably thought of as something of a protective measure, but over time, the authors found it was kind of a bad deal because it was hard for their works to outcompete like free or i.e. pirated copies of Dickens and other works from Europe. On the other side, there are, of course, policy arguments that protecting these AI outputs will devalue human authorship and displace human creators. So those are some of the arguments we're seeing. And we are reading them, as I said, carefully. We want to get the best arguments for both sides to sharpen our thinking and the recommendations we make to Congress. So what's next? We are planning to publish a report this year in several sections. The first section will publish this spring. That's not going to be on copyrightability. That will be on digital replicas or the name, image, and likeness like issues, including the possibility of a federal right of publicity that was mentioned earlier. The second section that will address these authorship and copyrightability issues, that will be out this summer. And then later in the year, there will be one or more report sections dealing with fair use, with licensing, and with potential liability for outputs of these generative AI systems, including questions about labeling the outputs. And in addition to this work in the report, I should also mention that we are planning to update our compendium of copyright practices, which is our guidelines for our copyright examiners. That update will include it will reflect our thinking from the report and also include new examples for the AI world. And with that, I will turn it back over. Thank you.
So much, Andrew. I oversaw the first revision of the compendium, and yeah, no, but as somebody who did this and worked in the Copyright Office, I just want to clarify a couple things for the, since you're an international crowd, because most of you don't have, I don't think any of you have registration. So when Andrew said you have to disclose or disclaim AI generated content, it's really easy to do on the application. There's simply there's a page that says limitation of claim, and then there are fields you can check. It's like some text, some artwork. So it's not as though you have to go through and describe every single thing that was generated by AI, because that really, I think, confused a lot of people in the US even. And the other thing is that the office has been doing this forever, that for things that are in the public domain that are included in a work, for a third-party material that you include, like the artwork on the wall in a movie. So it's not that new, I think, for the copyright, from the Copyright Office's perspective, and doable. And the import of that is that when you are in litigation, somebody infringes you, if they copy the AI generated portions of the work, that's not infringement, of course. Just like if they copy just the public domain portions of, say, a book, that wouldn't be infringement. So sorry for making that clarification. Now, I think we will turn to Alison.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And, thank you for the invitation to be here with you this afternoon. I think it's really important because I think there's a lot of synergies to be had between authors and translators. We have a lot in common. I think we always have. We've always worked together. And I think that at this point in the sort of AI debate, we're very much sitting at a similar vantage point. Translators have always been told that we'd be replaced very easily by the technology. And finally, it feels like we have some other professions who are in the same boat, and not that we're happy about that at all. But it just feels like, a lot of people are now starting to have to face this thought of being replaced by artificial intelligence or technology, which is something that we've been dealing with for a number of years. And I think that ultimately the impact on authorship will certainly be what society designs, what it decides, or even perhaps what it accepts, because the AI doesn't operate on its own. It certainly still needs humans to, to program and to give it commands. So talking about the impact of AI on authorship with regards to copyright ownership and rights, and looking at it from a translator's perspective, our access and I think sometimes our knowledge about copyright has been erratic and perhaps limited at best. With regards to ownership, we quite often have not received the recognition that we would like to have for our ownership, and quite often we don't even own our own data. And one example of that would be agencies that contract translators then claim to own the data that's generated by machine translation, not by machine translation, rather by the tools that translators use. And then the agencies can use that for their own machine translation engines. And our rights really have been very relative because we work across national boundaries, across cultures and across languages. And so therefore, the jurisdiction, where we live and who has contracted us very much affects our experience of rights. So the idea of derivative rights has certainly helped the recognition of translators' work, because it's sort of seen as a work in itself. And previously, copyright was always very much seen to be attached to the original work, unfortunately, as were the awards and the royalties. But things are very much changing, and now you'll see a translator accept an award alongside the author of the book that they've translated. So as I say, things are changing fast. Literary translators certainly have had a bit of an increase in their visibility, which is important for acknowledgement of your ownership and your rights. We have a Name the Translator campaign, hashtag Name the Translator, which really was about working to get translators' names on the cover. And, certainly professional bodies and associations and forums have been very helpful in that sense, because they have provided us, with credibility, along with accreditation, which is part of that credibility, and also to get the credit that we deserve. But AI is certainly going to make all of this much harder. And as a profession, I think one of the problems that we face is the hype, the sort of the media hype around the benefits and the uses of artificial intelligence. And it's created a problem for us in the sense that we're finding that the general public generally conflates the issues. It conflates we won't be replaced by technology with we won't have anything to do with technology, which is actually not the case. Translators have been using, tools for translation, CAT tools, for some 20 or 30 years. And it's now just that, we have neural translation, neural machine translation that certainly changed the quality, that it's become an issue. So we've been using it and we're not afraid of it. And we understand the benefits as much as we understand the harms and the risks. So, but unfortunately, when we try to express this idea to the general public, we get accused of being Luddites and of standing in the way of much deserved advancement in technology. So one of the other things that they tend to conflate is the idea that AI is really a machine that is a human, or that has human characteristics, or at least has the potential to act as a human. So the tendency towards anthropomorphization of technology is a real problem, I think. It talks about machines as being people, or talking to them as if there were people, and that makes it a little bit more difficult. It enhances this idea that the human and the machine are interchangeable. They're just almost like grocery units. You can move one out and move the other one in, and no one's going to notice the difference, which of course is not the case. Another thing that the general public will often conflate is the idea of we can with we should or we must. We have this technology, so therefore we absolutely must use it for absolutely everything. And that's not the case, because quite often it's not suitable for every problem or for every solution. It's not a solution to every problem. And we have to think about that, if it's not suitable for problems, or if it is, and if it is, then which ones and how we will employ it, rather than just letting AI do everything, which is really sort of akin to letting the kids run the household, when actually it's the adults who have the experience, the knowledge, the ability to reason, and the executive function to be able to do the job properly. So there are some things I think that we can safely let AI do, like the typing, but I don't think that it's really useful for the creating, because the creating is important work. And that's what authorship is. It's about creating, as opposed to just spitting out whatever, even if what is spat out is actually not too bad. It doesn't have that same sense of authorship and creation. And that is something I think about ideas traveling through the person, for want of a better way of explaining it. And it's about, I guess, that work having the benefit of an individual's personal and professional perspective, and hopefully both, a combination of the both. And I guess it's that X factor, that personal contribution of the person, which is about, I guess, it's the art, isn't it? It's the human expression, and certainly a shared humanity. That's what, creativity is about. It's about an expression of our humanity and a connection. I had an English teacher at school who used to explain to us that a good writer was someone who could take an experience that you'd had, or a thought, or a feeling, perhaps a fear, and put it down in words in a way that you couldn't. And then when you read it, you connect with it. You understand it in a way that you wouldn't have before, or just in a deeper way. And it's like, oh, it's that. Absolutely that. I get that. It's almost an aha moment, I think, is, again, for want of a better way of expressing it. It's something inexplicable and something vital, something that Garcia Lorca might have explained as duende, something that comes from within, and it's certainly very human. And that's what life is about. It's about human connection, and about, those moments that make your skin vibrate and make you feel like life is worth living. So creativity is about people and expression of our being, I think. And it's not about efficiency and metrics and, time saved. It's more about time lived, I think. And it's about having a choice. I think we need to think about the choices that we would like to make. And we need to ask ourselves those questions around what kind of society do we want to live in? What kind of lives do we want to have? And certainly, if society then chooses to let AI do everything, which seems to be the way some people perceive that we should be doing, what are we going to do? This isn't necessarily going to turn out well for us. We won't all be sipping martinis by the pool, I don't imagine. It will actually be something along the lines of not having any work to do. And then you have to think about, where does the income come from? So, the questions around the use of AI, or perhaps the unregulated use of AI, are really as much social as they are technical. And if we choose to let AI take over authorship, we have to ask what will be lost. Now, every year on the 30th of September, we celebrate International Translation Day. And this year, our theme, each year has a different theme. This year, our theme is about, translation, an art worth protecting. And that's really about an expression, I think, of the importance of protecting. It's copyright in some ways, but also protecting that idea that our contribution, our human contribution, is valued, because we have to ask what will be lost if, we have AI running everything. I think what will be lost is that deep thought and that deep work and that human contribution, which, as we know, is really important. It's about the connection. I mean, what did we do when the pandemic hit? Everybody was hiding in art. They weren't, they were doing reading books and watching movies and, picking up new hobbies and learning to express themselves in a creative way, because that was a way of dealing with it and reconnecting with the people. So, I certainly think that use of AI for creativity is not going to produce many of those aha moments. It's certainly not going to create, for example, the music of Bach if it hasn't already been created, because AI just recycles. And in the end, I think the AI of impact on authorship will really be what society decides, or, as I say, what we accept or what we let it be. So I think with that, I might stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. Wonderful comments on the importance of human creativity and what makes it human. So last but not least, Michelle Woods is going to talk to us about the work at White Belt.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mary. And yes, in fact, we are working diligently and quickly at this point with our translators to get all the documents ready for the next session of the Standing Committee on Copyright, the SCCR, as I think it's known to many of you. And for the first time, we will have AI on the agenda as a topic within the Standing Committee on Copyright and focused on the intersection of copyright and AI, specifically generative AI, although our sense is that a number of the people we have for the panels probably will go beyond that particular topic. So we're very much looking forward to that. And it is interesting that in a year where we have 2 diplomatic conferences being held at WIPO in 2 different areas, not involving copyright, still AI has managed to dominate the discussion, dominate the conversation, and very much dominate the concerns of our member states. Because at the end of the day, we, of course, are driven by the member states in terms of how we spend our time, what our priorities are. And clearly, this is a huge issue for our member states, as well as for our hundreds of observers. For copyright alone, we have over 400 observers, and the organization has well over 1,000. Of course, several of them, quite a few of them probably, are represented here. So in terms of the position on AI, we started out very much in listening mode, and we're still in listening mode, as well as in convening mode, bringing people together from all over the world to talk about AI and its implications. But recently, Darren Tang, our DG, has gone a little further in terms of clarifying our approach, the key issues, and what we're focusing on in the AI discussion. And so I'd say there are 3 things. One is to focus on the humanity of artists and innovators. And he's emphasized a number of times that this is certainly where we should focus until we get to AGI. Then we need to figure out what happens there. But I think it would still be our focus, but at least in his view, we're some way away from that. And so the focus is on humanity, on representing those and making sure that the creators and innovators can carry on their work and do something that's always a priority for us, which is trying to ensure that creators, that authors can make a living at their work. Of course, not all can. We're all, creators of copyright content, et cetera, but making sure that creative industries, which is something that's very important to our member states, including to the developing countries, are able to thrive. And the linchpin in that is the creators and innovators. And then a second theme is that we shouldn't be afraid of AI and generative AI, that these can be useful tools, that they need to be controlled, and that humans need to be in charge, but these can be useful tools. I think Alison mentioned that there's been use of tools for 20 to 30 years by translators. This certainly is the case for us at WIPO, including in our services. So patent registration, Madrid, Hague registration. We have been developing a lot of internal tools, or looking at that at least, and thinking about how to use AI internally. I sit on that task force as well. And there, you'll be pleased to know, there is great concern about copyright. But at the same time, the focus really is on AI as a tool for the organization. And we see AI also as a useful tool for creators. And in the upcoming information session we're having on AI, a number of the creators who will be speaking do use AI as a tool in their work. and they will try to help us with where this line is and making sure that AI is a tool, but that they, at the end of the day, are the creator or the author of the work. Then third, because we're an international organization, a big focus for us is on developing countries and on making sure that developing countries both are not hurt by AI. In other words, that creators and innovators in developing countries, small businesses, woman-owned businesses, that all of these contributors to the creative industries and the creative ecosystem are not, for example, just decimated by AI, but at the same time, that they can use AI, that they can use AI and its potential as a tool. And this is something that, because of our key role as a development agency, along with the UN in general, we're focused on. There are areas of the law where it does seem that WIPO is able to be one of the main, I guess, kind of facilitators of use of various tools. I think of a totally different context, but our WIPO Connect software for developing countries, meeting a need that may be met for, in other ways, for developed countries. It's early days on that, but that is definitely something the organization is thinking about. So I mentioned we will have an information in session in the SCCR. And this was requested by Group B, which is our group of developed countries. They meet in room B. That's why they're called Group B. And they don't want to be called developed countries. So they requested this at the initial request of Germany. And part of what they were saying is there should be a conversation specifically in the copyright committee. There are so many copyright issues that we should be talking about AI and generative AI specifically in the copyright context. So we will be doing that. This information session will take place on Thursday, April 18th, next week, in the standing committee. It'll be held for 4 hours in the afternoon. This is a format that is now developed for these information sessions. We will have 2 panels, one focused mainly on individual creators and authors, the second focused more on systems, on platforms, system operators, and also on businesses that are affected by AI. And we are trying to have not just the negative effects. We know those will, of course, be highlighted and will come out, but also the positive. What is happening in terms of developing solutions, boundaries, licensing, common practices. There's been discussion, for example, about codes of conduct, common contract terms, for example, for opt-out, technology tools that may facilitate opt-in or opt-out, and of course, education, and all those things need to be done. So we'll try to have some examples of those kinds of activities and developments, as well as, of course, detailed information on what is happening out there, the rapid developments, and the great impact on the creative industries. Outside of the SCCR, we've been talking about AI at WIPO for quite a while through our conversations on frontier technologies. We have 2 of these conversations each year, and the last couple have been focused not only on AI, but really much of the time on copyright, not exclusively, but a lot. And I'm well aware of that because we have been partnering with our colleagues there. The director in that area is Ulrika Till, and trying to find speakers that will bring a message that we think is important for the member states to hear. So some of you may have been approached by us already. Some of you may be in the future. The last 2 conversations, and these conversations are held online. They do have many speakers, perhaps 20, 30 even, plus a number of stakeholders and member states who have planned interventions near the end where they can give a statement of position and also ask questions. And these information sessions have been attracting an audience of about 5,000 viewers each. And that is quite good for us, for our programs. And the SCCR, we think we're doing well if we have 500 here, of course, with 5,000, that's a lot more people hearing this message and getting this important information. So as I mentioned, the last two have been heavily focused on copyright and AI. Before that, there was some general information gathering on AI and the positions of our member states, what their questions were. And these sessions are likely to continue. So I expect we'll be working with our colleagues on another session like that in September. If you have good suggestions of speakers, and we do try it in the last part, it can be the representatives, the lobbyists, nothing wrong with that, lobbyist myself formerly. But we're really trying to get people who are working hands-on on the ground with the AI or being impacted by it. And so if you have suggestions like that for us, it appears we're going to need a continuous supply of speakers. And when I was hearing about translation, I was thinking, you know, that's really a point we should bring out there in the conversations. So I will wrap up by saying we are also involved in the UN discussion on AI, and perhaps somewhat troublingly, when we first started receiving documents about AI from the UN, they did not mention intellectual property at all. And then when we said, hey, this is really important, IP is a key component, and copyright right now is central, then we started getting some pushback like, yeah, that's the problem. No. So we have gotten very involved in showing that IP is not the problem, but in fact may be a very important part of the solution in terms of, as I mentioned, maintaining the humanity, but at the same time using AI as a tool. And where we have found a lot of support within the UN system, and the work in the UN is related to issues of governance and transparency and ethics. And those may not be directly copyright issues or IP issues, but they have a very strong link to it. Transparency, of course, if you're looking at scraping data, transparency on what was scraped is, of course, key in order to think about solutions and protecting the rights of authors and creators. And that's just one small example. So that we see going in a good direction, and we see a lot more openness to including us and including IP in the conversation. And of course, we will continue to push for that. So finally, there are a lot of questions, and our information session will be asking a lot of questions about what should be the role of WIPO, of the UN, of multilateralism. Is there a role? And we're hearing very different answers right now. That's not unusual as a technology evolves, but we do expect to continue having these discussions. And our DG has said perhaps there are small areas where we could be helpful in terms of bringing people together to figure out at least some small part of this system. But we'll have to see. As you all know, we are a member state driven organization, so that has to really come from the member states and from their request. Meanwhile, we're heavily involved in educating ourselves and convening others to discuss the issues so that the member states have the base of knowledge to make those kinds of requests and recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So we have about 5 minutes now for questions. So I'm going to just open it up and see if there are any questions here in the room or on the Zoom. Yes. Do we have a mic that we can hand around?
My name is Josephine and I'm from the Association of Illustrators and Graphic Designers in Sweden, or the Swedish Association. And I didn't quite understand, you know, when you showed the Mid-Journey images, did the one to the right, did that get copyrighted?
No.
No, it didn't, because that's what I sort of,
Correct.
right,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
I was unclear about that. The version on the left was not the submitted version. That was the journey output initially. And then the artist in this case used Adobe Photoshop and a few other programs to like up resolution and like make a few detail changes. The one on the right is the image he actually submitted to the office for registration. And sorry, so the image on the right was the one that was actually submitted to the Copyright Office, and we rejected that submission. So
Can I ask you, so how did he work on the right image? Did he put bits on it himself from the Photoshop or something like
our
that?
understanding is that he plugged the image from Midjourney into Photoshop and used Photoshop to, for example, like increase the resolution of the
Okay,
image.
so he didn't like add his own
He
physical
may have
bits
changed
to it, so-
a few details, but
Oh.
no, he didn't add a great deal
Yeah.
of substance. And
So it wasn't like it wasn't worked. It wasn't involving human work, so to speak.
that was our interpretation,
yeah.
yes. And to be clear, what we have said is that to the extent an author takes the output of an AI system and adds a lot of new content of their own, they would be able to register the delta. They would be able to register the addition, their own contributions on top of that, to the extent that those contributions warrant themselves copyrighted contributions. I just off my top of my head thinking of an example, if you had an AI system generate you like, I don't know, like just a landscape, and then you on top of that went in and drew a bunch of figures of humans and animals in the landscape, you could register the figures and humans and animals in the landscape. You just would own that delta and not the entire landscape, except in the maybe in the selection coordination aspect.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Oh, and I should say thank you again to Mary for clarifying our guidance. Those were two important points about it. It's consistency with our general practice over decades with regard to public domain and third-party material.
A lot of confusion about that when it first came out. You have a question? There's a mic right there.
Thank you. I'm Ville Hytönen from the Finnish Fiction Writers. Well, how can I ask that? This is a little bit hard question, but I was wondering that as a writer from the smaller language area, I was thinking about that well, is there a big difference or gap between these you know, books which have been mined in English or other languages? Is it like 99% of the books are English books, or which is the difference between the other smaller languages and English?
Thanks. Umair, you can take it,
Yeah.
but my understanding is it's mostly, most of the books come from pirate websites and it's mostly English language, though there are some foreign language.
Yeah,
books too.
the main question is that how much we have time.
Ah,
Right, right. That's a really good question. I mean, I think for the big LLMs, I know that they can translate stuff and sort of like process text in their languages. But as far as like the I mean, you know, it's a really good question because I'm not sure if the translation function of the LLMs is trained the same way, or if it's like the LLM is trained on like a corpus of English books. I mean, what we have looked at, they've predominantly been English books. But, you know, since the LLMs can also respond to queries and translate between text, I don't know if they're using some other kind of computational protocol, or whether there was like additional training done on Finnish books or like Spanish books. But this is a really interesting question, and raises a question of, well, why were the initial AIs all trained in English? Is it because there was more English material? I don't know, Stephen, if you have any.
I'm not sure about that, but I mean, sort of one characteristic of the most recent LLMs have been you can put bigger input into it. So now it's, you know, pretty standard for the latest version of models to basically take a book length input into it. I don't know specifically if you could then say, translate that into, and then you could say any language you like. But probably that's not too far.
Yeah, but it is a really interesting question because like the idea behind training is like to get the machines to understand linguistic or, like encode linguistic features. And I guess maybe it's only because the AI were developed in the US that the books were, yeah, it's just
One thing you hear a lot, especially when they first started playing with the large language models, was, hey, we didn't teach it that language, but it knows that language, right? Because obviously it scraped the entire web, and then probably among the other corpuses, there was a lot of, a lot of people use UN documents and translations to teach things, language translations. So one would expect that, to do just the raw translation from one to the other without the human aspect that you spoke so eloquently about, that's like here.
Thank you, Mary. I think I've got a similar concern about the indigenous African languages because even Google does not recognize indigenous languages in South Africa and Africa. And I just wanted to know what will be the future of the content that is generated through the indigenous languages.
I know that there are efforts being made to sort of bring some equity into that. I know that there are like I grew up speaking Urdu, and for a long time Google and like the platforms didn't have Urdu facility. And I actually, one of my friends is a programmer. He worked at Google and he developed like the facilities for their apps to be able to understand and respond in Urdu. So I mean, I do understand. I think there is some concern that like in the broader AI realm, like indigenous languages will be not represented. But I think like the speakers of indigenous languages are also worried that there'll be exploitation or expropriation, like if the training is done on those languages. It's kind of a double-edged sword, I would.
That's a big problem is the data and having access and controlling the data, and certainly with Maori language, there was a radio station that for years had been making recordings, and then they were able to, digitize all of that and use it as data for language. But they're very, protective about controlling that because, as you say, they know there's going to be a huge amount of exploitation. And so there's that double-edged sword where in order for Indigenous language speakers to participate in the digital world, they need access and, they need a certain amount of, data for that. But then what happens to the data as it is? It's, how do you control that? So that's a very big issue at the moment and one that, will need to be resolved. But and also having that data, to then access as well. Some languages don't have a lot of written text that they can use, others have more. And so, yeah, there is that sense of it's not equal and yeah, being in control of it is important.
So I think, do we have time for one more comment? Then ask this one more. Okay, go ahead, James.
So I wanted to thank everybody on the panel for the information that you gave. It was an interesting experience for me. Umair gave this empirical presentation with like infinite detail that basically was describing what to me seemed like the description of a murder. Then I heard about how the people who are committing the murder don't really care. They have so much money that if they had to pay a financial penalty for the murder, it doesn't really matter. They think that it's justified by some sort of larger human purpose. Then the Copyright Office explained to me how one cell of the body couldn't be protected, but other parts could. Just an aside for the Copyright Office, if we can only register 10 images at a time, it doesn't help. We need more. And then we heard why people matter. why the person who we've just killed should be of concern to us. What it leaves me with is not a very good feeling. And is an authors group. I think we need to be focusing on a full understanding of all of these things, but I think we need to be focused on accountability. If there's not a remuneration system which would hold people accountable for the platforms, accountable for what they're doing, I don't think there's not a cost. There needs to be a cost to be accountable to us as authors. And so it's not a question, it's a comment. I think that's a focus that we need to have.
Thank you, Jamie, for that wonderful summation. So we are going to break for lunch now, and I am going to ask for a change in the schedule, if it's okay with Thanasis. We had said that our lunch break would go to 2:30, but I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to see the solar eclipse. I, for one, really want to see it. I was hoping we could see it out on that terrace there, but I am not 100% sure because of the building blockage that we'll be able to see the sun then. So we may need to go down to the street, and I would suggest going to, you might be able to see it on Park Avenue, which is that way, or 38th Street, which is there, but we will monitor the situation. In any event, we are going to come back at 2:15 from lunch, so that we can take a longer break. Is that okay, Thanasis? So we can take a longer break for the eclipse. So come back at 2:15 for lunch, and then we will break for the eclipse. The fulcrum of it is meant to be it's supposed to be at 3:25, but it starts at around 2:50 and goes till about 3:55. So we were thinking we would break at 3:10. And then come back around about 3:30. Okay. Okay, well. Okay, well, we can maybe, take a break at 3:05 then. But we all want to be outside at 3:25. And it will be in the middle of your panel, Janet. So we'll break and then come back. Okay, great. Okay, well, thanks. And lunch is here, is that right? Is it in this room? Okay, right over here. Okay. Thanks to the panel. You guys are great.